Hi, Year 10. It's Mr. Ozapadi with another video for the Religion, Peace and Conflict unit. There's going to be two lessons this week, because I think we would have two lessons this week, although I really can't remember whether it's week A or week B. But anyway, we're doing three lessons one week and two lessons the next week. Um, so overall, we'll get the right amount of lessons, is my point. So the two lessons we're going to do this week are about social justice, which is part of the Religion, Peace and Conflict unit, though it's a little bit separate from the other things we've been talking about. So this is your title. So with this lesson, there's no resources, extra resources. Everything's on the PowerPoint on this video. So you can just make notes based on the video. So just pause whenever you need to. So the title is this: How can I use quotes to explain what Christians think about different kinds of social justice? So obviously we're going to begin by looking at what social justice is, what I mean by that phrase, and then we're going to look at some Christian quotes. It should be a fairly straightforward and short video, but let's see. Okay, so here is the definition. Social justice means fairness in terms of the distribution of wealth and opportunities in society. So when someone's concerned with social justice, they are concerned with how fair society is, whether society is a fair place, whether people are treated equally in society. So that's what social justice is all about, making society a fair place. Now, you might think, well, what's it got to do with religion, with peace and conflict? Well, we've looked at war, but obviously social justice is a question of conflict in society, because there are some people, it's something that people fight for. Either in it, you can fight in a violent way for it, you can fight in a non-violent way for it, but either way, it's something that's a source of conflict in society, because some people are treated unequally in society and other people are interested in fighting to make the situation better. Okay, so as well as understanding what social justice is, we need to understand the different kinds of social injustice, which is the opposite, the kinds of unfairness that we find in society. So the things that people who believe in social justice will try to fight against. So here are some examples. Racism, obviously a huge example of social injustice. So an example of something where groups of people are sometimes treated unfairly because of the colour of their skin, and people who believe in social justice would be people who are fighting against that. Xenophobia is fear of people who are foreign, people who are from different countries. So, sometimes racism and xenophobia go hand in hand, but racism has always been associated with prejudice on the basis of skin colour, whereas xenophobia means any prejudice or discrimination against people who are not from the same country as you are. Sexism, treating people differently because they're male or female. Obviously, historically, has been a huge source of social injustice, and sexism is still a source of social injustice today. Feminism has made some changes in society, but they're far from complete. Women still earn less than men for doing the same jobs on average. That's just an example. Homophobia, which is prejudice or discrimination against people based on their sexuality, based on being gay or lesbian. Obviously now there's lots in the news about other forms of discrimination, transphobia, those kind of things. So that when before people would talk about fighting for gay rights or lesbian rights, people now talk about LGBT rights. So that's something that's kind of changed in recent times. Poverty, so unfairness on people based on not having as many resources, much money as other people. So that's a big source of inequality in our society between rich and poor. It's interesting, while the kind of steps have been taken to fight other forms of inequality, in our society, inequality between the richest and the poorest is on the increase. So there's more inequality between rich and poor. Prejudice against immigrants. So yeah, as well as it kind of connected to xenophobia and racism, I suppose. But often you see prejudice against people for being immigrants in a country, for living in countries that they're not born into. So these are some of the forms of social injustice we have in our society, and some of the things that people who believe in social justice try to fight against. Anything extra to say about that? Oh yeah, sexism. I was going to say another word that you sometimes hear is misogyny. Misogyny means hatred of women. So sometimes sexism and misogyny go hand in hand. Misogyny is kind of another word for sexism, although it's probably a stronger term. It means kind of hatred rather than just unequal treatment. Prejudice and discrimination is two words I've used. So prejudiced, what do those words mean? It might be good if you're not sure to make a note of these. So prejudice against a group means it's to do with how you think about that group. So it's linked to the idea of prejudging. You judge someone based on membership of a group. So you look at someone and based on whether their gender or their race or their sexuality, for example, you judge them in a particular way, and say in a negative way, if you're prejudiced. So that's what prejudice means. So if people judge people in a particular way just based on their gender or race or something about them, that means they are prejudiced. Discrimination is when people put prejudice into practice. So when people discriminate, that's when either the laws or the actions of individuals discriminate against particular individuals. So for example, before 1967 in this country, it was illegal to be homosexual, to be a practicing homosexual, and therefore that group were discriminated against. In the past, in countries like South Africa or the United States of America and many parts of the world, there were laws that were racist. So they were discriminatory laws. There was discrimination in law. So that's the difference between prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice is how people think, and is just in your mind, into people's heads, and then discrimination is when it's actually put into practice, when there's actually unfair treatment of people based on who they are. Okay, so you should have the definition of social justice written down and some examples of social injustice, the sort of things that people who believe in social justice fight against. We're going to look at quotes. So what I want you to do is I'm going to look at three different sections. So for each section that I do, for each slide that I put up, I want you to copy out and explain a certain number of quotes. And the three sections are going to be quotes which show in general that Christians are in favour of social justice. So these are just general quotes that show that Christians think that people should be treated equally. Then we're going to look at some quotes that show that Christians believe in particular kinds of social justice. So that would be, things like, that Christians are specifically against racism and so on and so on. So particular kinds of social justice. And then we're going to look at some quotes which might seem to show that Christians are against certain forms of social justice. Before we do any of it, though, I'll come back to this. I'll come back to that last point later. So let's start with this one. So I want you to write down one of these quotes and explain what it means in relation to social justice. So these are quotes which I think show that in general, Christians should be against social injustice. In general, they are for treating all people fairly and equally. So here's the three quotes. I only want you to write down one. If you want to write down more than one, make notes on it. That's up to you. You might find it useful. First quote, seek justice, defend the oppressed. That's from the Old Testament, from Isaiah 1:17. So seek justice just means, that's a command. It's telling people what to do. You should seek justice. So seek justice, look for fairness in society, trying to make fairness in society, and defend the oppressed. Oppressed are people who are treated badly, who are discriminated against. So it seems to suggest that Christians should be against all kinds of injustice and in favour of trying to come to the defence of people who are treated unfairly. Nice and simple quote. Second quote, one we've looked at before. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. That's in the New Testament, Galatians 3:28. That quote it kind of encompasses lots of different things, but the basic point is everyone is one in Christ Jesus. All the differences between people are irrelevant from the point of view of Jesus. So Jew nor Greek, well, that's looking at things you could use it to apply to race or ethnicity or the country someone comes from. So fighting things like xenophobia. It doesn't matter which race you are. It doesn't matter which country you're from. Slave nor free. It doesn't matter whether you're a slave or a person who's a free person. In our society, we might use that to apply to your position in society. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor. Male or female, doesn't matter what gender you are, you're all equal to Jesus. So that might be used to argue against all forms of discrimination or prejudice. Another one, I quite like this last one. So God created mankind in his own image. Now, the idea here would be that God created all human beings in his own image. That means that all human beings should be equally valuable, because the idea, it's a complicated idea, but the basic idea of the Bible saying God created human beings in his own image is to say that human beings have something of God within them. They have something of God within them that makes them special. There's something about them because they're created in the image of God. There's something about human beings that make them special and makes them stand out from all of the rest of creation, from animals and the rest of the things that God created. Now, the reason why it's relevant to social justice is he says mankind. He doesn't say one particular group of mankind. He doesn't say men or people of a particular skin colour or people from a particular country or rich people. He just says mankind. Now, it is a bit sexist because it's the use of the word mankind, but mankind here refers to the human race in general, so it means everybody. So if everybody is made in the image of God, that means everybody is special to God, and that means that in theory, Christians should be against discrimination because they should think everybody is equally valuable to God. Okay, so one of those quotes and explain why it makes Christians in favour of social justice. Second one. So this is B. I want you to copy out 3 quotes that we could use to show that Christians believe in particular kinds of social justice. So here I want some quotes to show Christians are against sexism, they're against racism, they're in favour of equality for the poor, they're against discrimination of immigrants, or they're against xenophobia. So I'll just talk you through these quotes, pick 3 of them and write them down and explain what kind of social justice they're relevant to and explain why they're linked to that kind of social justice. So first one is one we've looked at before. If you copy this one down for part A, I wouldn't copy this one down for part B. But there's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you're all one in Christ Jesus. Well, you could use that to say that Christians should be against sexism, because it says there's no male or female, you're all one in Christ Jesus. You could also use it to show that Christians are against xenophobia or racism, because it says there's neither Jew nor Greek. So you could use that in 2 different ways. We'll go down. Next one. If you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. That Jesus says that in Matthew 19:21 when he's asked about someone about how to get to heaven. So he's saying you should sell your possessions and give to the poor, and this is specifically he's asked this by a rich person. So what should a rich person do to go to heaven? Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Well, this seems to suggest that Jesus is very interested in equality for the poor, for helping people in poverty. So it suggests that Jesus is concerned with helping the poor. So that's the kind of social justice he's against there. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Proverbs 31:8. Well, destitute means the poor. So again, this can be used to say Jesus believes in helping the poor. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of those who are destitute. Sorry, this isn't Jesus. This is in the Old Testament, Proverbs. So this is saying you should speak up for the poor in society. You should try and fight for more equality for the poor. Okay, this next quote is from Acts 10, which is from the New Testament. I now realise how true it is that God does not show favouritism, but accepts men from every nation. So this is one of this is the book of Acts. So it's not Jesus saying it; it's followers of Jesus writing this, and it is saying it's against xenophobia. You could use it against racism too. God does not show favoritism. He accepts men from every nation. So people from every country or background are equal. Next quote is a quote from Leviticus 19:33. So this is from the Old Testament of the Bible. And this quote is linked to the story of the Jewish people. You'll remember that the Old Testament of the Bible is about the Jewish people. And it's about how the story of those people. And one of the stories of the Jewish people is at the time of Moses, who was one of the leaders of the Jewish people, the Jewish people were slaves living in the country of Egypt. So it's not their own country. They considered their own country to be Israel, which they think of as the promised land, the land that God gave to them. But they weren't living in that land. They were slaves in the country called Egypt. And the story is all about how Moses led the Jewish people to freedom from Egypt. They left Egypt and eventually they travelled, and much later they found the promised land and lived in Israel. But the idea that once the Jewish people were slaves in Egypt is important for this quote. So the quote says, "When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not ill-treat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourselves, for you were foreigners in Egypt." So it's saying to the Jewish people, look, you used to be slaves in Egypt. You were foreigners in Egypt. So you remember what it's like to be mistreated in someone else's country. So based on your, not obviously not the memory of people, because this would have something that happened many generations before. But what they're saying is, because the Jewish people were treated badly, then those people should remember that. And when foreigners from other countries come and live in their country, they should treat them well. In fact, they should treat them as your native born. So in other words, treat them as well as the people who live in your own country, who come from your own country. So it's against prejudice against immigrants in particular. It's saying, you were immigrants in a country, you were treated badly, therefore you should treat people well who come and live in your country. Now it's interesting because that specifically applies to the Jewish people, because it's talking about the history of the Jewish people, and obviously today most Christian people aren't Jewish in background, and therefore that they don't have that story wasn't part of their history. But for Christian people, the Old Testament of the Bible was still really important. So they would consider the moral lessons that are given in the Old Testament of the Bible apply to all Christians, not just to people who are from that Jewish background. So they would look at that story, even though Christians aren't Jewish, they would look at that story of Moses as part of the history of their religion. And therefore they would agree with that idea that because Jewish people were treated badly in Egypt, that lesson should be learnt from, and people shouldn't be treated badly who come and live in our countries today. So I want you to copy 3 of the quotes down, explain which kind of prejudice or discrimination or social injustice they're against, and explain why. Try to pick 3 that are different kinds of social injustice. So don't have them all to do with poverty or all to do with xenophobia. Try and have a mixture of different things. Okay, hope that makes sense. Okay, last one. So this C, I want you to write 2 quotes down, or 2 of these are quotes. One of them is a story from the Bible, not a direct quote, but just kind of a shortening of a story that suggests that Christians may not always believe in social justice. Now, important thing to think here is, the important thing to remember here is that, and it might be good to make a note of this, Christians, if you asked a Christian, are you for or against social justice? There's no kind of Christian who's going to say, I am against social justice. So when we're saying that Christians may not always believe in social justice, that will be more said from the outside. Some people might say from the outside, well, hold on, look at these teachings you have. I don't think you actually believe in social justice. But what I want to make sure you don't do is in an exam question, I don't want you to put, some Christians would say that social justice is not important, because I don't think any Christian would actually use those words. There might be things that people who believe in social justice generally believe in that some Christians don't believe in, but Christians don't think that makes them against social justice. And maybe that'll become clearer as we go through these examples. So let's have a look at these 3 things. First one, the story of Ham. We all found this story quite bizarre and strange. Let's just read it through first. So Ham was the son of Noah, who built the ark in the book of Genesis. According to the story, one day Noah got drunk and fell asleep naked in his tent. His son Ham walked in on him. Instead of covering up his father, Ham ran to tell the other brothers what had happened. Because of this, Noah put a curse on Ham's children, saying that they would become the lowest of slaves. Now, what's this got to do with social injustice or social justice? Well, you might remember that when we did the lesson on racism in the Relationships and Families unit, we said although this really hasn't got anything to do with discrimination on the basis of race, on the surface of it, there's nothing in that story that's about race. It has been used by racist Christians, for example, in South Africa and in the United States of America in the past. It's been used by them to justify the enslavement or the poor treatment of black people. The idea being, in their kind of twisted interpretation of the Bible, was that the descendants of Ham were black people. and so that they used it to kind of make their case that they thought racist prejudice was justified. Important to say that the majority of Christians throughout history and throughout the world are completely against that interpretation of that story. And to be fair to the Bible, there's nothing in the story that justifies that interpretation, but it has been used in that way in the past. So there's one example of Christians who've been against social justice based on a story in the Bible. Okay, here's some, I think, while Christians are not really justified by that, the interpretation of the Bible is not really justified. These next two quotes do seem to be against forms of social injustice. So 1 Timothy, the book of 1 Timothy, chapter 2, verses 11 to 14. I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man. She must be silent. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. It was woman who deceived and became a sinner. So here you can see clear evidence of social injustice in the Bible. This quote is saying that women cannot teach or have authority over a man, have power over a man. Women must be silent. It's saying that it seems to be saying that men are superior because Adam was formed first and then Eve, and it's talking about Eve being deceived, became a sinner, because in it Eve was the first person to eat the fruit from the tree. So here's some clear evidence. It seems that there's sexism in the Bible. Sorry, I've been a bit distracted because people are walking in my office here. So if that's a bit rambling. So yeah, that seems to be clear evidence that Christianity is sexist. Now, I said before that Christians would never say they didn't believe in social justice, but remember back to our lesson on sexism in the Relationships and Families unit. Christians who believe that, in this quote, Christians who believe that women should not teach or have authority over men, they don't believe they're being prejudiced against women. They believe in this thing called complementarianism, which is the idea that men and women are equally valuable but have different roles. So they would just say, well, it's not a place for a woman to teach a man or to have authority in the family or in the church. A woman's place is to kind of raise children and follow the authority of men, but they're still equally valuable. So they would not express their beliefs in terms of, we don't believe in social justice, but obviously from the outside it does seem that they don't believe in social justice if the idea is that men and women should be equal. Last one, if a man lies with a man as one lies with a woman, both have done what is detestable. So this is showing evidence of homophobia. Christians think that it's wrong, or some Christians think it's wrong for people to be gay, engage in homosexual relationships. Again, for Christians, they wouldn't say this is social injustice, or the Christians who follow this quote, they would be more likely to say, well, we're not against that person, we just think that it's wrong to engage in homosexual relationships. So they would say, we believe in treating all people equally, but we just think that some things are immoral and they shouldn't do that. For someone outside, though, who would say, well, hold on, but being gay is like a big part of that person's identity, so you are basically prejudiced against them, that would show that Christians were against social justice. So you've got to look at it from both points of view and see how Christian would frame it. Okay, so you should have the quotes down and explained for each section. This is the last thing I'm going to talk about. Just going to briefly skip through this. Describe Christians' attitude towards fighting social injustice for a 6 marker. Now, if I was writing this 6 marker, I would do, obviously you've got to do 3 SEEs. I would do 2 quotes to show how Christians are in favour of social justice. You might do 1 in favour of social justice. So you might do the first one to say, generally Christians are in favour of social justice. And you'd use, perhaps, I would use all mankind, God created mankind in his own image, and then talk about how that means all human beings are special to God. Then you would do one to show that a specific kind of social injustice. So you might talk about God does not show favoritism but accepts people from all nations, to show that God is, this shows that Christians believe that God thinks people from all backgrounds, is against xenophobia, thinks people from all countries and races and everything are all equal. And then I might do one to show, well, maybe Christians aren't always for social justice, but I would phrase it like this, my third SE, I'd say, some people might accuse Christians of not always being in favour of social injustice because there are parts in the Bible which suggest that, for example, homosexuality is wrong. Use the quote, explain what the quote means, and then you've got a really good explanation. You're not saying Christians themselves say they're against social justice. You could say they are accused of not being in favour of social justice, which is much more the way you need to phrase it, because, like I say, even conservative Protestants who are very against same-sex marriage and very against, or Catholics who are against women priests, they don't phrase those things as social justice issues. They would just say that's just the way things are. They wouldn't say it was social injustice, but people from the outside would say it was a matter of social injustice. Okay, I hope that all made sense. Went a bit wrong when someone came in the room and I got a bit distracted, but hopefully it all made sense. Thank you.